Hello, my name is Adam Lerner, and I'm the director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver and the curator of the exhibition, Mark Mothersbaugh, Myopia, that is currently at the Contemporary Austin, just 5 blocks away. And this is a conversation with Mark Mothersbaugh about his visual art that is inspired by the association with this museum exhibition. And I just want to let everybody know that the exhibition is free to all South by Southwest badge holders. And everything you will see here is also encapsulated in a book that came out just now about a year and a half ago, Mark Mothersbaugh, Myopia, which talks about all of Mark's visual art and life and career. And many of you who are clearly much clearer than me, know Mark from his work with the band DEVO. And many of you who know sort of the deeper dive into Mark's work might know as well that he's scored over 150 television shows and movies, including the Pee-wee series, Lego Movie, the early Wes Anderson films, and like Life Aquatic. But the purpose of this talk and this conversation is to be able to introduce you to his lifelong career as an artist, which includes both his music and his art. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take less than 10 minutes to provide you with an overview of his visual art so that we are all on the same page and you all know the body of work that we're talking about if you haven't yet seen the exhibition or read the book. And this way that we can have the conversation and you'll all know what Mark is talking about. So Mark entered art school at Kent State University in 1968, and much of the art he was doing was inspired by Andy Warhol, as you see from this sort of series, but this is actually a series of decals, and he would put decals up around campus. Very, very early example of street art, which is a term that didn't exist at that time. Many of you also might know the story of how DEVO was formed in the aftermath of the Kent State shootings, May 4th, 1970, when the Kent State campus, roiled by student protest, was met by the National Guard firing at student protesters, killing 4 of them. At that point, Mark, as an art student, and his classmates, other artists, musicians, as well as filmmakers and poets, created a collective to explore the idea that the world is not evolving, it is devolving. And hence, they originally formed Sextet DEVO, and then in 1973, and then a year later, 1974, DEVO, the band, but also more of an art collective producing a range of work from film to literature, as well as music. Mark at the time was making art that explored a certain dark side of the world, manipulating these prayer or saints cards, work had a Dada influence, sort of influenced by this sort of dramatic art between the wars. You'll see that much of the art actually had gas masks in them, and so masks were a big part of his visual vocabulary. Mark and Jerry Casale, the co-founder of the band DEVO, would perform privately in Jerry's apartment wearing masks. This was a kind of like private kind of play. But when Mark found this mask that he named Boogie Boy, he named all of his masks, he no longer wore the other masks, and he would feel uncomfortable if anybody else would wear his Boogie Boy mask. So Boogie Boy became, this man-child became his lifelong alter ego. In 1975, he wrote a book called My Struggle, Boogie Boy. And that book he not just wrote, but also illustrated and self-published. And it had also this sort of Dada-esque, this grotesque quality to it. At the same time, if you look through his journals, which I actually had to do in curating this exhibition, to go through many years of material to sort of make sense of Mark's art, you'll see that in addition to this sort of very grotesque collage imagery, he also had an intense fascination with grids. And so throughout his journals, you'll see his fascination with numbering, ordering, and gridding. Now, if you are looking at this material, then you will understand this. And so you see how Mark's visual vocabulary became the vocabulary of DEVO as it started to emerge, first in the mid-'70s, and then finally in 1978, when they signed with a record deal. But while this is the image that many people know of DEVO, DEVO also had Boogie Boy as often the face of the band, this man-child image. So in the early years, DEVO was represented iconically by both the band and also this, Mark's character, Boogie Boy. And in many ways, this is a better representation of the DEVO than the one we have, because DEVO was both this obsession with order and uniformity and also its opposition in the sense of childlike freedom, childlike escape, this somewhat grotesque figure who is also free, a mutant who is able to escape the rigors of uniformity. Now, Mark at this time was making all art that actually continuously drawing, even while DEVO was at its height. He was often drawing on these postcard-sized pieces of paper, very often using characters that are kind of outlandish or freakish. In many ways, those people who are offbeat is a sort of celebration of the mutants or the failures in the world, a kind of dark image of those individuals who are struggling with the rules of society in a way, but which have a kind of existential like feel to them, like what is the meaning of it all, especially, but the idea of the postcard was a really important image, and they combined the sense of humor with them too. What's amazing about the work is its incredible diversity, so therefore you see this is a selection of postcard drawings that then became prints. And starting in the 1990s even, Mark was starting to exhibit these as prints throughout the country, actually even internationally, with the help of sort of #1 DEVO fan, Michael Pilmer. And these images then, became, these exhibitions then sort of became also his next body of art, which was on these mutations. So taking the idea of the mutant, the sort of the figure who is outside of uniformity of society, like Mark started to further celebrate that with this series of manipulated photographs. This mirror image was a crucial image for him. And then this became thematic for him as obsession. And Mark will talk a little bit about this. But this then, the idea of the mirror image, which was a really important symbol for various reasons, but notably, of course, the eyes are the clearest indication of our own sense of bilateral symmetry as humans, and Mark's obsession with eyes and eyesight is an important part of his work, which he'll talk about today. But even going on from these mutant images to these mutant sculptures, created this 2 scion car, and then more recently, this was created about 15 years ago. And these mutants or 2-sided My Little Ponies that are in the exhibition. Also you'll see in the exhibition, actually, do I have audio? No. Also you'll see in the exhibition these orchestrions or music-making machines that he creates out of organ pipes and bird calls and other sound-making devices, and then composes music for these mutant machines. And everything about them has this quality that is like that includes both this sense of it's got this catchiness to it, but also a sense of weirdness to it. And I guess you could say everything throughout that he's done has had that similar kind of sort of parallel quality. This is a little close-up here of what of a bird call that he then composes the music for. Obsession with technology has been crucial for Mark throughout his life. This is a postcard that I found and that he had created in 1975. It shows 19th century medical illustration with these intense braces, these draconian braces. So it's in some ways it's like the equivalent of a mask, a gas mask, in the same way it's like this thing that constrains you, but also gives you, makes you breathe, gives you health. And it's the thing that makes you a mutant. But I don't know if you can see it, but it also says on top, self-portrait 1975. And I think that that's actually crucial because this is the equivalent to everything that he's done, especially with the sort of music-making machines. The idea is that things that are just functioning normally are not interesting to Mark. Only when they are defective, out of touch, out of step with the way things are, then they become interesting. And that's, I think, what Mark is sort of suggesting. Later on, he begins to take this mutation idea and combine it with this sense of this man-child, the sense of child's play. And it's through play that we find our freedom. And I think that's where he would have these figures he calls roly-polies. And they have this dualism to them where there's something like, there are these like very goofy figures. They're a little bit sad, like they've got paint on their head, like they're like poor guys, they don't even really care that they've got someone spilled paint on their heads. But there's something like sort of sweet and playful about them too. And I think that as Mark's work moves on, he still has this sort of darkness, but is able to actually combine it with this also sense of more pure childlike play. His sense of audacity did not change at all. In the exhibition, you'll see that he carved the largest ruby in the world into a soft serve ice cream cone, which also looks a little bit like a DEVO hat, an energy dome, and also looks a little bit like a pile of poop. Continues to make these drawings throughout his life, and then the culmination of the exhibition is this room that has 30,000 postcard size drawings. So now I'm going to call up to the stage Mark Mothersbaugh to talk about his work.
Please be around for my funeral. Everybody, God, to have an apologist like that, that's awesome.
Well, Mark, I'm sure the one question, the fundamental question that people want to know is, what is for you the relationship between your work as a musician and your work as a visual artist?
Well, it all comes from the same place for me. I don't know what you guys do. Are you musicians? Are you journalists? Are you concerned parents? Yeah, okay. To me, it's. I don't see them as separate. I think a lot of people nowadays are more. There was a time when you separated all the different disciplines, but now everything overlaps.
Can you talk about how you got your start as an artist?
As an artist? I first became aware of art as drawing things when I was 7. I went to an optometrist and they found out I was legally blind, and I'd been walking to school for 2 years in a fog, but it was like correctable blindness, which what a great thing to have if you're going to have something. And I got a pair of glasses and I saw things for the first. I saw a tree, the tops of trees. I saw clouds. I saw houses. I saw the housing development that I lived in, and I saw the school, and I saw the woods that I walked through every day to get to my school, all at the same time. And so I started drawing trees because I was just impressed with them. And I had a teacher who had been making me stand in the corner, spanking me in front of the other kids, sending me to the office, just trying everything she could to get me to quit being a a-hole in second grade. Just come up and go, "Oh, you draw trees better than me." And it was kind of like this thing where I thought, I want to be an artist. And so I just started drawing all the time because of that.
Wow. And so tell me, like, some of those early influences that they gave direction for you for what kind of art you were going to make.
Well, I went to a public school system that had not much in the way of any kind of artistic program, but I somehow accidentally stumbled into Kent State on a kind of as much trying to not go to Vietnam as anything else, and I found this other world that I fell in love with, and it was, you know, partly printmaking was something that just, and I saw art movies, which I'd never seen before. I saw stuff like Satyricon, and Kent was bringing in all these artists, so there were quite a number of people visiting the school, both in the music and the art department, and I think the people that influenced me at the time were, you know, you'd get a Velvet Underground album, and it had the Andy Warhol cover on it, and then you'd find out that Andy Warhol did these great paintings and these great silk screens, and he made movies, and he was a photographer and was mixed in with the fashion people, and he threw really great parties, probably the best parties in Manhattan at the time, and you're like, that's so amazing. I want to do all that stuff. You know, it made you want to just mix it all together and be part of that world.
So there's this quality of like this subconscious in your work almost. This sense that you're making 30,000. You know, so far you've made over 30,000 of these drawings every day. How do you see? What is it that you see as the driver for all of that?
Say it again.
Well, yeah. So you're. What do you see as the source of these kind of fantasy-like works?
You know, I have to apologize. I was in my first rock band 52 years ago, I figured out. I was thinking about it the other day, and played music even when DEVO didn't play, then I started working with orchestras, and you have to turn it up really loud to hear everything that's going on there too.
Sorry.
But so the source of this stuff, I don't know. I think it's just everything that goes on in life. You know, for me, it's like I respond to you know, like traffic tickets and rent payments and medical exams and horrible news on TV and traffic jams.
And it seems though that what I was describing, this idea that there's a sense of order that you're interested in the world that you repeat, but also there's this other side that's chaotic, that's free. Do you see your work in that binary term as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you, like, even that last, I think it was the last photo you showed up there of the room with all the books, somehow that makes me feel, there's something about that room that makes me feel like all these little things that you feel every day, all the twitches and all the little urges, it feels like they're organized in some way, even though there's no more organization than anybody else could afford by buying 300 red books that all look the same and then putting your stuff in it, you know, whatever you did during the day. But, you know, it's like something about that. There's an order to what I feel is like the organic part of being a human.
So I'm actually fishing for a story that you told me that, I'm sorry about this, but that we published in the book, that I was really moved by. It was so explanatory for me of your art, and that is, you know, your story about when you were in college and you went to the church.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well that's, you know, in all fairness, I think what I brought to DEVO because there was a couple of us involved, and everybody had something they brought in. Part of what I brought in was an interest in that part of your brain that they say it's not active, the part that supposedly is just getting a free ride. And and I went to a full gospel church. Anybody here a full gospel member? You are? Do you speak in tongues? Your family does. See, I went to a full gospel church meeting not knowing what to expect and being totally impressed by the idea of speaking in tongues, which to an uninitiated person, it sounds totally crazy. It sounds totally crazy. But the idea of surrendering your intellect to a higher force or to a spirit world became it really influenced me. It made me like then when I'd be in Akron, on the way to walking to work, and there was a homeless guy just ranting, it made me want to know what he was talking about, or if there was some information he was pulling in from somewhere. And it made me wonder, where is that world? And if it has anything to do with that 90% of the brain that's getting a free ride that might really be the important part of our brain, who knows? That's the part that I was curious about that. I was wondering if the 10% that's like a nanny for our body and our brain, that the other 90%, I was wondering if the 10% that we know about is the boring part.
So tell me about. No, that was good. That was good. They seem to like it. Okay.
That doesn't make any sense. I know.
No, I think it really does. You're always searching for what's beyond that grasp of the sort of rational mind. But tell me, going back to your story, you were doing all different kinds of art in the early 70s. You even were writing a book. You were making these postcards. You were exhibiting your art in galleries. And also you were doing music with DEVO. Tell me what happened once 1978 and DEVO started to become very popular. You were touring all the time. How did that affect your art making?
DEVO, we didn't think of DEVO as a musical band, really, when we first started. That's the ironic thing. We were art students, and we thought of it as, we thought it was more like a bigger idea, like a movement. And we're in like some crappy little apartment we're renting in Akron, sitting there like around a table late at night talking, like in grandiose terms. And we wanted a re-education network, and instead of people dancing, they'd be doing calisthenics and getting healthy to the music we were doing. And we were going to be talking about our version of religion meets science, which we were calling de-evolution at the time. And we were like, stop, we're all mostly wrong and a little bit right. And we were just kind of like thinking of a new dialogue to interpret what we were observing on the planet. No?
Yeah, and so you were actually, but you were also with DEVO doing a lot of the visuals for the band, working with other bandmates in a collaborative way, in the way that collaborative artwork.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that, when we thought, okay, so this is like 1974, and there's a Popular Science magazine, and a friend of ours, Chuck Statler, who went to school with us, came back from Minneapolis, and he had this Popular Science, and it had this young American couple smiling and going, wow, and they had this silver disc, like a bright silver shiny disc that was the exact same size as a record album, which is how we listened to music back in those days on vinyl. I know there's people are like interested in it and like this kind of like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to have a Model T and drive it around kind of thing today. So it's back in popularity right now. But these things, laser discs, they had like 90 minutes of information, and not only sonic, but visual. And so we thought, you know what this means? This means that pop culture is going to be taken over by artists. We were sure that people coming out of art school, like art school bands, art school filmmakers, were going to take over pop culture. it didn't quite exactly happen as we were thinking, and it took a long time before MTV finally showed up. But so we were doing our own graphics, and when we did our record deals, I mean, everybody, no matter how paranoid you are or how smart you are or how much power you are when you go into a record deal, you always make really bad mistakes. That's the one common thing that everybody can agree with. And ours was, we were doing things like saying, okay, we'll take less money if you let us do all the graphics and all the artwork for our album covers and design our posters and our merchandise and all that stuff. And they're like, okay, so you're saying you'll take less money if they're like, okay, I guess we could allow that. It was one of our many foolish moves back in those days.
And so, if you could just describe a little bit about how it is that now in your life, actually in your daily, everyday work, what you do, how it is that making artworks and making music, how those two happen in your life.
Well, it's just, okay, so DEVO had this gestation period. Every band has they're like a different, they're in a different petri dish. You're like some bacteria or some virus in a petri dish, and you have your lifespan, and then finally something kills you, whether it's just internal disagreements or lack of popularity in the world or something, and or you're like some ultimate virus bacteria like the Rolling Stones or something that are so strong and had such an amazing idea and concept and they're still able to keep it going, which is pretty great. But most bands, you have this. So when we got into that place where we were heading into self-imposed cocoon, siesta, hibernation state, we'd done like 6 albums where, it was like, okay, you spend 3 months, you write 12 songs, you rehearse them, you go record them, then we did our own graphics. So then we had to come up with album covers and posters, and we designed outfits that we wanted to wear on tour, and we designed a stage show, and then we'd book a tour, and we'd go out and tour the world, and then we'd come back, and a year later, we'd do the same thing over. We'd write 12 more songs. And so when we got to the cocoon, siesta, hibernation state, sadly enough, 6 albums into things, a friend of mine said, hey, will you score my TV show? And it was called Pee-wee's Playhouse. And so I said, well, okay, I got time now. So on a Monday, he gave me a tape. On Tuesday, I wrote like 12 songs worth of music. On Wednesday, I recorded it. On Thursday, I had to put a half-inch master tape in the mail and send it to New York where they were editing the show. Friday, they edited it into the picture, and on Saturday we watched it on TV, and on Monday they sent me another tape, and I was like, I just did a year's worth of work in 1 week. I like this job. And so it got me like really interested in scoring things, and it was such a, and that show, it was kind of an anomaly. I mean, now anybody that works in TV knows that there's a lot of people and lawyers and that all have a say on whatever you do, and they're like very involved. But it was kind of out of control, and they just let us do whatever we want. I got to do whatever I wanted to do, and I could make like references to other people's music or to my own music, and I got really comfortable with backward masking and putting messages in stuff I did, because I'd heard about all this like heavy metal black stuff, and I was like, well, what's the opposite of that? And I found out, and you can try this at home, if you have Jesus loves you backwards is we smell sausage. It's so freaking awesome. It's like if you show somebody that, if you have them say it in it, then you reverse it, and you have them say, okay, say we smell sausage, then it goes, Jesus loves you. They love it. It's like, anyhow, so, but that wasn't the, then I digressed into the stuff I was really concerned with, which was like de-evolutionary messages to little kids and stuff like that. And I just loved that. I just loved that world, and we kept DEVO going because that was where we started. It was ground zero in a way. But then I went into this whole other world. But it allowed me to do visual art much more than being in DEVO did. Because with DEVO you're sitting in the waiting room at radio stations, and you're sitting in airports, and you're sitting backstage waiting to go on, and it's like when you're doing music, when you're scoring things for film or TV, you can, I have a studio now where I can write a piece of music and then go, all right, Bradley, mix that in, that's cue reel 5, music cue 73, go ahead, mix that into picture, and then I can go in the other room and pull out things I drew in the middle of the night before and work on them, and if I find something I really like, I can put it in a computer and I can blow it up and do other things with it. And then when he's done, then I go back and...
So in many ways, you've always, whenever you've had any space outside of music in your life, you've filled that space with visual art.
Yeah, it keeps me out of trouble, among other things.
And then more recently, you've been doing a lot more work with these music-making machines. Can you tell us how these orchestrions got started?
Yeah, you saw a brief picture, and hopefully it's working if you go by the museum. It seems like it's been working on a fairly high percentage of... one of the bird calls apparently exploded, so I'm gonna go over there today, and I think it's gonna be repaired by the time I get there. But I was collecting. I collect eccentric instruments. At one time, it used to be really easy. Now eBay has made it easy, but has also made it so they're all expensive, unfortunately. But I have all these I love having something like maybe a celeste that has 2 notes that are out of tune or stuck together, so that when you write a melody for something, if you hit a D, you also get a D sharp at the same time, and so you incorporate that into your melody, or you incorporate it into what you're composing, and I don't know, I just loved all those kind of defects in older pieces of musical equipment, but I found organ pipes at junk stores and antique shops and online that were all these decommissioned pipe organs around the world. You can buy pipe organ pipes super cheap, just in case you were ever interested in getting some. I have hundreds of them. I do. I have like about...
He means you can buy it from him. Cheap.
No, there's so many out there. It's unbelievable. It's like, and I look at them and I look at the organ that they came from, and I know that they've replaced it with like a little Korg $150 keyboard that they go, not only does it do a pipe organ sound, but it does harpsichords, it does a choir, it does a piano. I said, and it costs less than what it costs to tune up the pipe organ once a year. So I understand how it happens, but it's sad to see them get decommissioned. But so I started collecting all these pipes, and at the same time I was working on something with a film director named Wes Anderson. He gave me some footage of these kids that were running away from a camp that they were at, and they were like 12, I think, in the movie, and they fell in love and they swore allegiance to each other, and they ran off and they camped on the beach or something. But in the footage he gave me, there was like an overhead view where you were looking through a woods in, I think, Rhode Island or something, and it was quiet. There was no sound, but I could see birds flying, and I thought, oh, that's kind of odd that, because he sent it to me without any of the source sounds or anything in it, and it was just purely silent. So I thought, well, I'm going to put some bird sounds in it, because I collect bird calls, because they're not, well, they used to not be that expensive, and so I put in some different bird calls that might have been in that neck of the woods, and then I lost interest in the movie, and I started writing music for for bird calls and organizing bird calls into like these percussive and melodic patterns. And when you're working with bird calls, you have less melody choices, which is kind of stimulating if you're kind of bored with keyboards after 70 years of working on keyboard stuff. And I started loving the bird calls, but it was hard to, but if you sat and played them, and it was kind of impossible to get 40, it was cost prohibitive to hire 40 people and say, okay, see that note, whenever those notes show up on the paper, that's your turn to go boop, or oh, or whatever. And so I found this guy who repairs calliopes and things like that for amusement parks. And he helped me build a machine that I could use MIDI to control, to blow air, tap little leather pouches, wiggle rubber things, crank slides, and do all these movements so I could articulate and perform on about 60 different bird calls. And so that's part of this show. They come on and they give you a break for about 5 minutes, and then they play for about 2 or 3 minutes or 4 minutes, and it's kind of like totally different than anything you get to do if you work on movies in Hollywood. Especially, it's like I work on a lot of animation, which in the end of the day, it's great because you get to, you get a 100-piece orchestra, and depending on the studio, like Sony, they've decided it's cheaper for us in the long run if we send him to London and he works at Abbey Road with the London Symphony for a week than if we pay musicians in the United States, residuals on these films. So it's like you both get to work with American artists and out of the country artists, and I like all that. But the music is basically, it all pays homage to things that have happened already. And with the bird calls, I wasn't writing it for anybody other than me. And with these orchestrions that are in this show, it was just things that made me happier, that seemed interesting or more noteworthy. So that's what those are. Was that a really long?
No, that was great. That was great. I wasn't paying attention, so I don't know. But
be careful what you ask me, because and you can just come up with a hand signal when you want me to shut the.
No, that was nice. But I want to open it up to the audience for questions. I'll call on people and then I'll repeat the question just so we have it in the microphone. Is that a good way of doing it? And yes. What is the inkjet printer that you're using?
Oh, for the prints. Oh, it's an Epson. It's like,
okay.
and
wait,
anybody
he's obviously a representative.
Anybody that's
of Epson
investigated that stuff knows that you can get these big printers that'll print 44 inches by 100 feet if you want, very inexpensively, because they just want to get you in there because they know you're going to buy 100 times the cost of the printer in ink over the next year or so. So it's like, but Epson, it makes a pretty good printer. Yeah, that was music that I'd written a long time ago, and it was kind of early on when there's sometimes it's like it's working in Hollywood is a kind of a great day job, but it's like even when we did DEVO, we did easy listening music. It was kind of in some ways more enjoyable for me to do parodies of our official releases, because it wasn't connected to a record company. We didn't have anybody, like counting pennies or saying, do whatever you want to do, just do another whippet. You know, I didn't have any of that stuff happening. It was like we were just doing stuff that was purely for joy. And Music for Insomniacs was like that too. And it was like after getting this thing called a Fairlight, which in retrospect now, I feel like I got to pull it out of storage, because it was like some Cold War, it looks like a Russian computer or something that was big and clanky, and it had these big 8-inch discs that you could sequence 8 instruments on one of these discs, and they were all these 8-bit samples of acoustic instruments, which was amazing, because even then it sounded fake. You know, it's like even then the strings and the oboes and the woodwinds and the brass and everything and the guitars, they all sounded totally fake, but I loved the sound, and so I turned them into Music for Insomniacs, because I loved the idea of like doing like these MC Escher sonic things with instruments that sounded like the vinyl fake wood paneling versions of real instruments. It was so that's what that was about. That stuff. I liked doing that. But
Yes.
yeah.
I'll just repeat this for the audience. So that was a question about a movie that Mark and DEVO did with Neil Young called Human Highway, which was just recently re-released.
Do you know what year it was made? It was like 78, 79, something like that.
Yeah, actually, it was filmed in 79 and then they released in 82.
Yeah, what had happened is, I don't remember, it's like that was all times when we were, like everything was happening really fast, but we had got a tape, audio cassette of DEVO music. We had a pretty girl, there was like one pretty girl in Akron, and we brought her with us to Cleveland when David Bowie was playing keyboards for Iggy Pop on I think it was, the 2 albums they did together was The Idiot and Lust for Life, and I think they did The Idiot first. And so he was on tour supporting The Idiot, and so we got, this girl got backstage and gave him a tape, and he threw it in according to Iggy, he threw it in a suitcase with about 100 other tapes that people had given him. But when they got back to Germany to record the next album, if anybody was ever in Germany in the 70s or earlier knows that German radio at the time was impossible to listen to, because you'd hear something by Mozart, then you'd hear something by Glenn Miller, then you'd hear something by the Sex Pistols, then you'd on the same channel. And they would just, because they wanted to have something for everybody. So it's like, it drove everybody crazy. Nobody, and David and Iggy didn't want to listen to that station. So David said, well, go through these tapes, see if there's anything to listen to. And Iggy found a DEVO demo tape, and they listened to it, and they go, that's not a real band, you know. And they were playing the songs in Berlin with the Sales Brothers, or Hunt Brothers. Who was it? Sale Brothers, right? Sale Brothers. Hunt and Tony Sale, that was it. Oh, shit, okay. All right, something like that. Anyhow, so the 4 of them were playing the music, and Iggy was friends with Tony Basil, and before we had a record deal, he came back from recording Lust for Life to California. He was staying in California at the time, and he came and saw the band, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know, I don't have anywhere to stay. And he let me stay with him for a while in Malibu. Bob number 2, Bob Casale, and I, we stayed at Iggy's rented house on the beach in Malibu, and watched him do these gigantic paintings of himself where he painted his dick like the size of a surfboard, which was really weird, because he would be like normal size in the painting, but you know, somebody asked me what happened to those paintings, and I'm sure that it's like when everything collapsed around him, because he was like a tornado. It was always dangerous to be around him, because he never got hurt, but it's like people around him did. But DEVO used to rehearse in his living room, And so he was friends with Toni Basil, who was the girlfriend of Dean Stockwell, who was at the time, he was like in a lost period of his life where he had been a child actor. Him and Russ Tamblyn and Dennis Hopper had been these young actors, and then they were like not doing anything, but they were still friends with Neil, and they used to make these home movies, and they were making one at the time, and they said, and so Toni Basil said to Neil Young, "Hey, why don't you get DEVO to be in your movie? You got to see them; they're crazy." And Neil was kind of cool enough that he looked and he said, "I know they could be my nightmare." And so there's a scene in Human Highway where he drives up to some like little cantina that's actually in like Taos, I think. It's like this place where those guys all like to hang out in New Mexico, and they drive in. He drives up there, and then he goes in. And once he got inside, though, he was at this club in San Francisco, a punk club called Mabuhay Gardens, where DEVO used to play, and it was our audience, and we're playing, and our deal with him was that we got some footage that he never gave us, unfortunately, but he did buy us these black kind of almost Nazi-looking cowboy outfits to wear for Comeback Johnny, which so we ended up shooting there, and then he said we could make something up and have it in his film too. So we said, why don't we be nuclear waste disposers? And so we got to be janitors, and we sang a song that we had mutated that was kind of based on a Kingston Trio song called "It Takes a Worried Man to Sing a Word," and we turned it into we did kind of like a funky version. I don't know. Did you ever see the movie? Yeah, and I just rewrote all the lyrics. I just made them all like really depressing about how everything was fucked up and falling down, and we were around all these hippies doing lots of drugs, and I was totally straight. I didn't do anything impure at all. At least
that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, I thought I didn't. Anyhow, so I was like, these guys are all crazy, and we kind of were a little bit dismissive of the whole thing. But then I saw the film years later, and there's this footage where we're jamming with Neil Young, and I don't think he'd recorded the Out of the Blue Into the Black or whatever, Hey Hey My yet, but he had us do it with him in this recording studio, and so Boogie Boy is sitting in who's, just me with a rubber mask on and a diaper, and I'm sitting there with a Mini Moog on my lap and singing the song, and I kind of rewrote him because I knew Johnny Rotten and I didn't want to sing about him, so I changed it to Johnny the Spud or something like that. But Neil was playing lead guitar, and he starts crushing my playpen, and because I was sitting in a playpen in this recording studio, and DEVO's playing, and Neil Young's playing these crazy solos over top of this long version of his song. But he crushed my playpen and was on top of me with crushing my playpen. And he noticed that on my underpants, it wasn't really a diaper, I was wearing underpants that day, and he noticed on my underpants, because of, to pay for our first DEVO film, Jerry and I started a graphic design shop in Akron that we kept open for exactly 6 months till we earned $3,000. Then we closed it down. But one of the jobs we had was we came up with a slogan for a Rust-Oleum company in Akron, and I found these letters that were press-on type back. I don't know if you remember like Zipatone or any of that stuff. Nobody here is old enough to remember before computers, I'm sure. But you'd rub the letters on, and I found this page of type that was rusted letters, and so we came up with the motto "Rust never sleeps," and so they wanted like 4 dozen T-shirts printed. That was our job, and I bought exactly 4 dozen T-shirts because it was cheap, because we of course underbid it and everything, But so I needed stuff to practice printing with my screen, with my silk screen, and so I found things around my house, articles that I could just print on, and one of them was my underpants. So he saw that, and he said, "Do you mind if I use that phrase?" And I was like, "No." And that was the first film I had music underscore in, because I had written music for an Ionesco play that Dean Stockwell and Russ Tamblyn were doing. That was just this off Broadway thing, and so they just took the music and used it. And
Great. We have time for a couple more questions. That was good. That was
can't shut the.
No, that was good.
I don't know
that
what's
was
wrong.
like all over. That was great.
Chatty
Covered a lot of
Cathy
ground
here.
on that one. Over here, yeah. The question is about the upcoming Record Store Day release.
There is an upcoming record store. I work for I work in Hollywood, and I do movies and all that stuff. But I have a daughter that needs me to drop her off at a bus stop at 6:45, and so I drop her off at 6:45. I'm at my studio at 7 in the morning, and nobody's there. So I have like a couple hours before people start going, "Mark, what are we going to do about that?" So I have a couple hours. I can do whatever I want, and I like to write music for myself. And I was writing this music that was kind of based on speaking in tongues. And I have a big body of it now. And the record day release, the disc has one of those songs on one side. And on the other side, I was kind of experimenting with, well, what can you put on a record, and I thought, I didn't want to do like the typical, picture discs where it's, clear and you have something inside. So I etched the other side of the record. I etched an image on it, and don't play that side. That's all I can tell you. Don't try to put that on it's bad for the needle.
I just wanted to say thank you for mentioning how we should mine like gear from the past to see what sort of cool things can happen with it today, like in a new context. One of the things that I've never done is get rid of a single piece of gear that I ever bought. And I've been really happy, like especially to pull out like an old Roland Space Echo, but I need to use like a toothpick or a stick to poke it to make it work, because there's sounds in there that are organic and just for that moment. So that was a cool encouragement.
So thank you for bringing back outdated gear.
Oh, yeah. It's like, it's overrated, honestly. I think I love outdated gear just because that's where I started. That's like a mini Moog is like the instrument where you could blindfold me just because of the time in my life when I learned how to play electronic music. Now you could blindfold me and you could say, all right, set up your mini Moog so it makes the sound of that from Smart Patrol, and I could go, not a problem, and I could do it totally without looking. And but now modern stuff is a little too daunting for me, and I have to have techno underlings that that kind of like go, okay, here, don't worry, you didn't erase everything. It's you hit but I love the new technology, and I wish I was a kid now, because I love the stuff that I had when I was a kid, starting off, and I met like a lot of early electronic pioneers in my day, and they showed me things like the first polyphonic synth, and I had the original neo-timbral orchestra, the Tonto, that Bob Margoloff and Malcolm Cecil built for Stevie Wonder. And the Beatles and Dylan used it. A lot of black funk bands used it because it was so trippy looking. They would like put on like space outfits and act like they were weightless in front of it on their album covers. But I had that in my studio for a while, about 10 years ago, and then Malcolm and Bob remembered why they had stopped working together, and one of them stole the instrument from the other one, and it's not at my place anymore. But nowadays, it's like I watch kids and I go, what a great time to be an artist. And whether it's visual or sonic or movement, it's such an amazing time. The technology that's, I have a 11 and a 14-year-old, these girls, and they have an iPad, and they're making movies, and I'm like, you know, it took me a year and forever and a lot of work to make a little stupid little DEVO film, and you guys it's totally transparent to them. They make these films with their friends, and kids all over the world are doing it, you know, because it's not expensive. It's easy. It's in their grasp. It's like there's software now. You don't even have to bother learning to play an instrument, you know, if you don't want to. You know, you just go boom, bap in your phone, and there's an app, and you can say, oh, I want it to be a TR-303, or I want it to be a Seattle grunge band, and it'll put those drum sounds in there. You don't have to own the equipment, and you don't have to be able to play it. And you put bass lines in, you put whatever you want, and you build a song, and then it's not like in the old days where you went, okay, what's a recording studio? How do I get there, you know? I'm sure there's none in Ohio, you know? And, you know, and then what's a record company? There's none of those here either, you know? It's like, you know, and you used to have to be invited into the castle, you know, in the old days, you know. A record company would have to say, you can come across the moat and make an album, you know. And it's like, now it's like a kid, if he writes a great song, you know, if he writes a song and he likes it, she likes it, she can just like make a video like my daughters did, and they can put it on YouTube the next day. It's like such an amazing time. So if anybody's 18 right now or 17 and they want to trade, I'll trade with them. Yeah, a lot of take. Oh, you raised your hand. Oh no, you were picking your nose. Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. Okay.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you. And I wanted to say too that don't forget the exhibition with all the orchestrions and the story of Mark's life and art is just about 5 blocks away at the Austin Contemporary, and all badge holders are free during South by Southwest, and you can buy the book there as well. And thank you, Mark.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for coming out here.